So today we're going to be talking about 4 barriers that I see holding a lot of folks back in their freelance career. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of some mindset things and some things that I think you can apply in terms of your thinking and your approach to, especially client acquisition or pitching for new work, that kind of thing. But there's also some practical kind of actionable tips and some stuff in here as well on some things that you can maybe apply to your own process. So let me start by just doing a quick intro. My name is Tyler Hakes. My background, I have been in content marketing for pretty much my whole career, so over 15 years now. I worked in-house and at agencies and some things like that for a few years. And then I started working actually as a freelance writer about 10 years ago. So I'm sort of a writer by trade, studied journalism, etc. In 2016, I started a company called Optimist. So Optimist is a content marketing agency. We work primarily with tech, SaaS startups, somewhere in that Venn diagram. Those are kind of our core clients. Right now, we have about 25 members on our team, primarily writers and designers, and we work with about 15 clients. So we're fairly small, but we've been doing it for about 8 years now, and kind of maintained around that size of 10 to 15 clients is pretty, where we feel pretty comfortable. Just for sort of context on, I guess, like my expertise on sort of the other side of the freelancing world, the team at Optimist is pretty much entirely comprised of freelancers. So we have sort of a hybrid kind of collective model that we use. And so over the course of those 8 years, I have reviewed over 10,000 freelance writing applications. Pretty much anytime we post roles that we're hiring at Optimist, we get hundreds or thousands of people who are applying for those jobs. So I have seen a lot of applications, portfolios, etc. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have there or provide any insight I can on how to best sort of pitch yourself or position yourself. In that time, I've also paid over $3 million to freelance writers. So again, I've worked with, probably hundreds of different freelance writers at this point out of those 10,000 plus applicants. Many of them we have hired and worked with either on an ongoing basis or a project basis. So, and then in 2018, I started what's called Top of the Funnel, or Tofu, which is our community. So we have a free community. We just, use it as a place to kind of connect with a lot of the folks who are interested in working with Optimist. That's sort of how it started. And it's kind of grown into its own little ecosystem. So we've got about 3,500 folks in there now. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little while, but it's just a place for people to connect. People ask questions, get feedback, that kind of thing. It's totally free, so it's pretty low key. But we try to cultivate kind of a space to again help freelancers sort of figure out their career path, connect with other folks in the industry, network, find work opportunities, etc. So that is my background. Let's talk about the reality. So I want to start by sort of acknowledging sort of the bigger picture right now, because I think a lot of folks are feeling extra stress and pressure and extra headwinds in terms of finding work, especially as freelancers, especially as writers. And I want to acknowledge that because I think it is a reality. I think it's the situation that we're in right now. This is a study from SEMrush. The data here, I won't go all the way into just sort of picking apart the survey that they conducted, but essentially a large portion of the companies that they surveyed said that they were essentially using AI to create content for free, which of course implies that they are not hiring people to create that content. So certainly the introduction of AI, people's belief about AI, using AI as a way to supplement or potentially replace human writers is certainly a factor that's happening in the market right now that we have to sort of grapple with. In part because of that, what I'm certainly seeing is that there are a lot more freelancers who are sort of actively looking for work, looking for clients. And so if you look at any given job post on LinkedIn or anywhere else, looking for freelance writers, I would be shocked if you don't see 100 plus applicants, if not thousands of people who are applying for every role. So obviously that means every single role is more competitive for you as an individual freelancer. You're going to have to potentially work harder to try to stand out, or if you're applying for that kind of a role. And of course, there are fewer roles because on the other side of the equation, we also have all the things that have been happening in the economy with job cuts and layoffs and budget cutbacks and things like that are happening. So I don't want to paint too grim of a picture. I just want to again sort of address that because I know that people are certainly feeling those effects, and it might feel right now like it's more challenging than ever. If you've been in this industry for a while, it probably feels like work is harder to find, clients are harder to find. And I think that is likely true. So it's not just you, it is an industry-wide thing. But the net of that is, that we have a situation where right now, you're probably feeling like you're fighting with a bunch of other folks for the same jobs. you're kind of dreading the day that your clients that you have right now maybe decide to try to use AI instead of pay for humans, or whatever, or you're working with companies who maybe don't really know what they're doing, and so they're sort of, it feels a little frantic. It feels like things aren't really cohesive. There's not really a strategy. But the good news is that there is still work out there. So I don't want to paint too grim of a picture to imply that because of these factors it's going to be impossible to get work as a freelancer or to be successful. This is just a screenshot from our community. One of our members, Caitlin, does this weekly roundup of jobs, and so this is just kind of a snapshot of some of her jobs. Long story short, again, there are a lot of roles out there. So it's just about finding those right roles. It's about having the right mindset and having the right approach to help you stand out, because it is more competitive. And so you are going to have to work a little harder, I think, right now to get those roles, and frankly, to compete with everyone else who's trying to get them as well. So let's talk about what the main barriers are that I'm seeing, and sort of how you might. So I think barrier number one is sort of the existential challenge of being a freelancer, which is the fear of rejection. I think almost everyone I talk to who is a freelancer or an agency owner, or trying to sell themselves or sell their work as sort of a creative person, has experiences this fear of rejection. The reality is that anytime, if you're a freelancer, if you're an agency owner, whatever it is, doesn't matter if you're you just started out or you've been in this industry for 10 years, you will face rejection. That's unfortunately, that's part of the job. That's part of the reality. Again, if 100 people apply to a job, only one gets hired. That means 99 get rejected. So you will get rejected. Unfortunately, you will also get ghosted. Clients will, you will send out a million emails and you'll hear nothing back. You'll even have clients who seem interested and then disappear. Unfortunately, I wish we could fix it. I think it's a big problem in our industry, but it's just the reality is that you will face that reality, and you will get feedback, right? So you will get criticism. Hopefully, it is constructive and not destructive criticism, but you will have to get that feedback. And so being able to sort of face that rejection head on, and more importantly, I think learn and grow from that rejection, I think is really a key component to being a successful freelancer or agency owner, or again, wherever you're trying to get with your career. Accepting that rejection is part of it, and using that as a method for sort of fueling your success. Here's where I would insert a slide with a million cliche quotes about, hey, Michael Jordan missed 6 million shots, or whatever, all the cliche things that people say about to try to make you feel better about rejection. I know that it stings no matter what, right? And I can tell you again, I've been in this industry for 15 years. It still hurts when we pitch a client and we get a no, or a client gives us really tough feedback on a particular article or whatever it is. Even if I didn't write it, I still feel that rejection. So I can't tell you that you're just going to get over it or whatever, but you will. I think it is important to recognize that it's part of the process. More importantly, I think there's some sort of practical things that you can do here. Number one, ultimately, I think comes down to kind of shifting your mindset or your approach to sort of pitching yourself, right? I think a lot of the fear of rejection comes around, I'm scared to market myself. I'm scared to pitch new clients. I'm scared to send out the cold emails, or, whatever you're trying to do to get work. I think a lot of people get held back because they're afraid to send those emails, because they're afraid that they'll get a rejection or they'll get ghosted or whatever, right? And I think that the way that we have to think about this is that what you think you're doing when you're marketing yourself or pitching or trying to sell your services is you're screaming at the top of your lungs, hire me or pick me or look at me, I'm great, all those things, which, to be fair, is part of it, right? That's part of standing out. That's marketing, that's sales, right? You are trying to get noticed. But really, I think the way to think about this is what you're actually trying to say to someone is you have a specific goal and you need a great writer who's going to help you achieve that goal. And here's exactly how I can help you, right? So shifting that mindset from trying to get attention to trying to provide value or trying to help someone. I think it's such a fundamental mindset shift. But ultimately, at the end of the day, people don't just hire writers for fun, right? They hire writers because they need help achieving something specific for themselves or for their business or for their team. And so you promoting yourself is not you bragging or whatever. It is you offering to try to help them achieve that goal that they're setting out to achieve. And so I think framing it that way mentally for yourself to say, by pitching myself, by putting myself out there, by marketing myself better, I'm actually doing a service to the folks who can benefit from what I offer. I think that fundamental mindset shift is just super important. And so, on sort of a practical level, if you think about the way that you approach companies, right? I think the reason why people feel sort of yucky about pitching and marketing themselves is because the way that many people market themselves is not very good, right? So there's this sort of running joke of the quote unquote pitch slap, which is, I connected with you on LinkedIn. I've never met you before. And I immediately like send you a sales pitch, either by email or LinkedIn message or whatever. And I can tell you, as an agency owner, I get about 10,000 of these messages a day. And most of them I just ignore, right? Because they're not focused on me. They're not focused on providing value to me as an individual. They are those, sort of people yelling, hire me, pick me, pay attention to me. And so the few pitches that I do pay attention to are the ones that provide value and frame their pitch not in here's what I do and here's why you should hire me, but here's what you need and here's how I can help you achieve your goals. And so I think the fundamental change here in terms of how you approach marketing or pitching or sales is, again, not here's what I do, please hire me. It's, I've done some work up front so that I can provide value to you and your business right away. So some examples of this might be, again, rather than pitching somebody and say, I'm a freelance writer, here's all my great work, will you hire me? Start with something like, I did some research and here are some topics I think would be a great fit for your website. Or, your competitors have covered this topic, but you haven't. So maybe this would be an opportunity for your business to sort of move in that direction. Or, there's a lot of buzz in the industry right now about this particular topic. Your company hasn't really written anything or created any content about this particular topic. Here's why I think it would be valuable for you. I noticed that your strategy seems to be X. Have you considered writing blog posts about these topics or targeting these keywords or whatever your service is, right? So the idea here is that you take that extra beat of time. It's not just like sort of mass personalization. A lot of people talk about personalizing pitches, which I think is valuable, but personalizing pitches isn't just putting my name in the email, right? It's actually looking at my business, analyzing my situation, and providing some sort of value that tells me on the other side of that pitch or the other side of your marketing that you actually understand what I need and you've actually given it some thought, and you're not just spewing a million emails out to every business with the same message. So I think, fundamentally sort of shifting your mindset from I'm just going to blast a million people and hope that somebody pays attention to me to, hey, I want to actually help somebody. In order to help somebody, you have to be able to lead with that value, really start from a place of understanding their needs and then explaining how your particular skills and your experience are going to help them reach their actual goals. So I think that's really the only way that you're going to stand out. Again, in a sea of 10,000 of these pitches every day, very few of them, in my experience, really take that extra minute to think through what's going to be valuable to me as a potential buyer or potential client. I want to talk about barrier number 2, which is another existential challenge, which is imposter syndrome. Undoubtedly, you have experienced this, whether you know it or not. Most of you are probably familiar with the idea of imposter syndrome, but just in case you're not, it's basically the idea that no matter how sort of experienced you are, no matter if you're, the world's foremost expert on a particular topic, you likely have times where you feel like you don't really know what you're doing, and you feel a lack of confidence in yourself and your skills, even though you have tons of evidence to back up the fact that you are in fact an expert, you are good at what you do, etc. And I just want to prove that, first of all, you're not alone. I can say, anecdotally, for myself, again, 15 years in this industry, I still feel this, I would say probably once a month at least. I have an experience where I'm trying to do something and I think to myself, like, is this even the right way to do it? Even though it's been the thing I've been doing for 15 years. So you're certainly not alone also in terms of feeling that imposter syndrome. And I don't know if this is the universe or what, but as I was putting together this deck and I was thinking about imposter syndrome, pretty much every time I opened my LinkedIn was somebody posting about feeling imposter syndrome. So I've got some fun examples to back this up even further. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, Noah Kagan. I believe he was like one of the founding members of Mint or like Intuit back in the day. He's gone on to like be a founder of like multiple companies and stuff. And so he posted this on LinkedIn just recently. I'm 42. I'm the CEO of a $100 million company. I've met 25 plus billionaires, and I still don't know what the hell I'm doing some of the time, right? So once again, everybody feels this. Dave Gerhardt is another guy that I'm a big fan of. If you don't know his background, he was the CMO of Drift, kind of the intercom, like, website chat company, went on to be the CMO of another company called Privy that was acquired, and yada, yada, yada. He built a huge following. He's, one of the most respected marketers probably in the world. And, this is his post talking about how he also feels imposter syndrome still to this day. So again, the unfortunate reality is I can't snap my fingers and tell you, here's how you solve imposter syndrome, but you can recognize when you have those bouts of imposter syndrome that you're not alone, that everyone feels those, and that is normal. I think that's the first thing to recognize here. Oh, sorry, I forgot about the slide. Just to illustrate Dave Gerhardt, if you're not familiar with him, this guy with 167,000 followers on LinkedIn. Again, one of the most well-known and well-respected marketers in the world, probably, expressing the same feelings. So, what I loved about this post from Dave, though, is that he talked about how he sort of reframes his own mindset when he has these feelings or has these thoughts, and he talks about sort of going back to this idea of first principles and sort of asking the most basic question, right? Like, what is the goal? Why are we doing this? What is the outcome that we're trying to drive, and what role does marketing serve here? Because I think a lot of imposter syndrome comes from this place of like, what could this be, right? We could do a million different things, right? We could write a totally different article than the one that we've written. But if we take it back to the first principles and say, yeah, but why did I write it this way in the first place? Why did I go down this particular path? Why am I doing things like this? Chances are you have a pretty strong line of logic and reasoning that have led you to that path. And so I think that makes it easier to say, like, okay, I've made a good decision here, even if there are other decisions I could have made. I can feel confident that the decisions I've made so far have come from a place of logic and understanding the goal and understanding what I'm trying to achieve. I'm a big proponent of the idea that I think writers in particular are ultra perceptible to imposter syndrome, because the way that I think about it is, writing is a thinking exercise, right? The act of writing requires thinking, and thinking is questioning, right? So as you think through topics, as you think through things, you inevitably are asking yourself questions, which inevitably leads you to the question of, like, is this the right way to do things? Is this, am I doing it the right way? Am I doing it the best way? All of these big picture questions are sort of inevitable in the creative process. And so again, I think recognizing that, hey, as a writer, you're likely to run into this imposter syndrome, maybe even more so than, an accountant or some other profession that might be, not going through that same logical process. So when I feel imposter syndrome, what I try to do, and again, usually the places where I feel imposter syndrome are, I'm working on something, I'm, 3/4 of the way through an article, I'm asking myself questions, I'm trying to, like, kind of sort out if this is good enough. And I have a moment where I say, wait a minute, is everything I've just written terrible? Like, did I go totally the wrong direction? I need to start over. And so what's helpful for me is, again, to go back to those first principles, to simply ask myself, what was the goal of this article? What did I set out to achieve by writing this? Why am I doing it? Why am I spending my time or money or energy writing this article in the first place? And what outcome am I trying to achieve? So sort of riffing on Dave's questions there. And then ultimately, have I taken that into account? Now, that's not to say that, sometimes you get into an article and you've written 3/4 of the article and you realize, hey, actually, I did take this in the wrong direction, and I do need to go backwards a couple steps. That's okay also. But I think if you get into it and you are having those feelings and you come back to these questions and you recognize, no, actually, this does work, like, this is serving the goal of the work that I'm doing, then I think what that ultimately leads you to is the understanding that, again, even if there are alternate ways I could have approached this, that doesn't mean that this approach is wrong, or that the thing that I've done is wrong, or that I don't know what I'm doing, or some of those bigger, sort of more fundamental and existential questions that might creep into your head. Another way that I like to frame this is, could ultimately becomes did, right? So I think we have these moments of imposter syndrome primarily, again, when we're sort of in the middle of a process or in the middle of creating something. And so it's easy for us in that moment to think about all of the alternate paths or realities of, I could have done this differently, or could I be doing it better, or could I be doing it, approaching this in a fundamentally different way. But if you think about that in the context of, like, work that's already done, right? So, like, could Jane Austen have been a better writer? Or, like, was Shakespeare happy when he wrote King Lear? Or, would Malcolm Gladwell have benefited from another round of edits? Like, those are the questions that as a creator or as a writer, you might think to yourself, in the creative process. But once the work is out into the world, like, nobody really cares, right? Unless somebody's critiquing your work on sort of a literary critique or something, they're probably not thinking about, could you have done things differently? And so I think that sort of reframe is helpful for me to think about, like, that imposter syndrome is almost always a symptom of the creative process and exists in the moments when your paths are infinite, right? You're working on something in the middle of it, but as soon as that thing is out into the world, those other possibilities sort of evaporate. And so I think that there's less of that feeling of uncertainty. So trying to think about that in terms of like getting something out into the world and sort of closing off those other possibilities and then just being happy with sort of what you've been able to do, I think is a big way to improve the process there, the mindset. Excuse me. I want to talk about barrier number 3. This is perhaps one of the ones that basically pulled my hair out the most because it's often very public and very visible, which is the idea of selling to yourself. Okay, so this is sort of a fundamental marketing problem, and I am, a sort of a converted marketing person now, so I view everything through the lens of marketing. But I think one of the fundamental questions that you always have to ask when you're doing marketing or sales or anything like that is, who am I trying to reach? Who am I selling to? Who is my buyer? And almost always, it's not you or someone who looks like you, right? It's somebody who looks different. It's somebody who's in a different type of role than the role that you play, and that's why they're interested in buying the thing that you have, right? Or hiring you as a writer. So the first question that I always put to people is, who hires writers, right? Once again, it's very uncommon that other writers are hiring writers, right? So when you're doing your marketing or you're doing your sales, you shouldn't be thinking about what's important to writers or what is important to me. You should be thinking about what is important to the people who I'm trying to ultimately reach and sell myself to. And so I don't want to shock you with my next slide, but it's me. I'm the person who hires writers, right? I am a writer by trade, but I am not a writer. That's not my day job. And so I don't think about writing stuff. And so if you're, on LinkedIn trying to build your brand and you're just writing about how to write good, that's not going to appeal to me because that's not what I think about. That's not what I care about on a day-to-day basis. And so you have to then ask yourself, what matters to these people that you're ultimately trying to reach. And depending on the kind of writing you do, it might be, editors, it might be marketing managers, it might be, I don't know, sales managers, whatever it is, right? Depending on what kind of writing you do, the person that you're trying to reach is probably a manager, a director, something like that, who is making those hiring decisions. And so, put yourself in their shoes or put yourself in my shoes, if you will. As I was mentioning before, as a writer, the things that you're thinking about on sort of a day-to-day basis are generally writing focused, right? From a work perspective, at least, right? So you're thinking about sort of the details and the minutia, things like punctuation and grammar and style and writing perfect intros and all this stuff, which is of course very valuable. That's what makes you a good writer. But when it comes to selling yourself to somebody like me, that's not the thing that I ultimately am going to care as much about. Like, of course, I expect you to think about that, and I expect you to be good at that. But that's not my goal. That's not my metric. That's not my KPI. And so things that content leaders care about, again, it's going to depend on the type of writing that you do and who you're trying to reach. But in my world, the people that hire writers are content marketing managers, etc. Right? So they're thinking about things like leads and traffic and keyword rankings and engagement metrics and all this other stuff. And again, they care about punctuation and style and grammar, but it's usually way down the list, right? It's much further down. And so once again, to sort of put this in practical terms, if you're thinking about how do I market myself to these people, we need to be thinking about these topics here, leads, traffic, keyword rankings. How does my work help them achieve their goals rather than how do I focus on my craft? And I think that, again, is sort of a fundamental misalignment where people, and by the way, even people in the world of marketing do this, right? Like marketing writers, content marketers who are really smart about writing content for other people and knowing their target audience and all these things forget this when it comes to marketing themselves for some particular reason. It's just easy to forget, right? Because you're thinking about this so much during the day that you think, this is the thing that's going to make me stand out. This is what's going to differentiate me is, how great a writer I am. So to bring it back to kind of a classic marketing refrain, it's, sell the benefit, not the feature, right? Punctuation, great intros, great writing, that's a feature. But what's the benefit to me if I'm, again, a content marketing manager? It's not that my content now has a great intro, it's that it's going to rank better in search, or it's going to drive more leads, or it's going to have more engagement with my audience. Whatever that is, that's what I care about more than the fact that it's subjectively good content. So when you think about marketing to sort of your actual audience, you want to create content, whether that's in a sales pitch email or a conversation that you're having with a client or a LinkedIn post that you're writing to, try to engage and reach these potential clients. Think about how your work affects their KPIs. So things like shares, engagement, traffic, budgets, ROIs, rankings, conversions. Those are the things that are going to be interesting to them. And also, by the way, it's going to help you stand out again as a writer because you have an understanding of how your work sort of rolls up into the bigger picture, which again, as somebody who hires writers, that's pretty rare, right? Many writers are sort of laser focused on their craft and they don't really think about how does this fit into the overall, marketing picture, or, how does this help achieve a specific goal? So if you can do that, if you can sort of position yourself as helping your audience to achieve their goals, that's going to make you much more valuable. It's going to make you stand out. It's going to make you just a much better candidate for any type of role that you might be going after. I want to talk about barrier number 4, which is the experience paradox. And it looks like we're doing pretty good on time, but just to give you all a heads up, once we wrap this up, I think we'll probably have like 20 to 15 minutes, somewhere in that range. And I'm happy to answer questions or anything. And of course, if you have questions for me as we're going through this, feel free to pop those in the chat too, and I can get to them when we get to the end. Okay, so the experience paradox is another one. This one is less cerebral. It's less in your own head kind of a thing, and it's more of a sort of fundamental challenge that exists in the universe, if you will. So you've certainly probably all experienced this, which is you're in a situation where you need a particular type of work experience in order to get a job or a gig or a role that you're after, but you can't get that job or that role or that gig until you have that relevant work experience. And so a lot of times you end up feeling sort of trapped, hey, I really want to move into, content writing for B2B SaaS companies, but I don't have any experience doing that. So nobody will hire me to do that kind of work. And so this feels like a trap. And in a lot of ways it can be, right? So I think we have to get a little bit creative about how we approach this, and we have to be strategic about trying to build that experience in a smart way so that we can kind of overcome this paradox. And so if you're a person who's, again, trying to move into maybe a new role, or you're trying to get into a specific vertical, but you don't really have that actual hands-on experience doing that thing, it can feel like a really long way to go to get there. So let's talk about kind of how we approach this particular barrier and how we solve it. So the sort of classic suggestion here, or the classic path for doing this, is to sort of build your skills brick by brick. So just let's use this as an example. Let's say that you're a writer and you really want to get into like more content strategy work, right? So your approach might be, okay, I'm gonna go sign up for 1 million courses and read 1 million blog posts, and I'm going to learn every skill that I need to know in order to go from a writer to a strategist. So I'm going to learn how to do customer research, and I'm going to learn how to do SEO, and I'm going to learn how content operations work so that I can figure out how budgets and staffing play into this. I'm going to learn how to do reporting so that I can better understand what's successful, and so that I can feed that into the strategy process. And so that is one way that you can approach this, is that you can go through this very long and arduous process of sort of piecing together all of the different elements that you need in order to move from the role that you're at to the role that you're trying to get to. Another example of this, again, might be like, let's say you're writing personal finance articles and you really want to get into healthcare, right? You might follow a very slow sort of step-by-step process, like, okay, I'm going to move from personal finance to I don't know, health insurance, and then I'm going to move from health insurance into this other thing, and you're going to kind of slowly make your way into that industry. Again, that is a path to get here, to overcome this experience paradox. But as many of you probably know, if you've tried to do this process, it's extremely time consuming. B, it can be very tedious. C, you can get trapped at basically any of these steps along the way. And D, when you get all of these skills, it's often very hard to kind of pull them together into like a cohesive thing. And you still actually don't have the hands-on experience doing the work that you're trying to get hands-on experience doing. And so it makes this process, in my opinion, and in my experience, it makes it very, very tedious. And so I forgot my emoji slide here, but many folks, try to go through this process. They try to go kind of step by step, and they get, kind of sidetracked along the way, or, they get to the end and they have all this knowledge, but they've never applied it in a way that is going to set them up for success. So they still can't get the job that they're trying to get because they still haven't done the work that they need to get the job. And so how do you ultimately, how do you really overcome that? My personal recommendation is do what's called make your own experience, right? So basically sort of take an end around approach, figure out a way to kind of get right into the work itself. And I'll talk about some paths to doing that in just a moment. But again, let's use this example. If you want to be a writer and you want to get into a strategist, my recommendation is basically sit down and build a strategy for a business, for a real business. And then what you can do is you can kind of work backwards to fill in the gaps. Undoubtedly, if you've never built a strategy before, you probably won't know all of the things that you need to know in order to build that strategy. But it's going to be a lot more effective to sit down and do that work and learn those things as you need them, rather than trying to learn all those skills one by one and then piece them together at the end into some sort of cohesive thing. And so how do you actually just sort of jump into it? How do you make your own experience? Basically, it's my advice to you is like build a shitty house, right? So the first time that you do something like this that you don't have experience doing, it's not going to be good, right? Because you've never done it before and because you don't have all the skills that you need. And so rather than trying to, again, using the same metaphor, go brick by brick, build your house one brick at a time, just sit down and say, okay, I'm just going to build a house. I'll figure it out. And then I'll go back and I'll figure out, okay, how does the plumbing work? How does the electricity work? How does, how do I, do the drywall correctly, right? Those things can come after the fact. But the first goal, I think, in taking that leap, making that leap into a new type of work and overcoming that experience paradox is just building the house, just getting something out there that you can learn from. And then again, you can kind of work backwards to fill in any of those skills and the gaps that you undoubtedly will have, right? So go into that expecting that it's not going to be good the first time, and that's okay. A couple of recommendations or sort of paths that you can take to trying to make your own experience. So once again, I'm going to, sort of frame this from the idea of, I'm a writer and I want to move into strategy, but you can, apply it to whatever, kind of leaps you might be trying to make in your career. The most obvious one and perhaps the most time tested is to start a side project, right? If you want to learn how to build a content strategy for your clients, make your own website, start your own blog, and build a content strategy for your own blog, right? And then execute it and see how successful it is. You have sort of your own built-in case study. I think that's one of the most, again, sort of tried and true methods for demonstrating your own skills and your own expertise. And by the way, you're going to learn a lot about being sort of your own boss and being an entrepreneur as well. So if those are skills that you can continue to improve upon, that's going to be really helpful also. Number two, I'm gonna sort of preface this because I'm not in general a fan of doing free work. I don't recommend people do free work. And I think any company that asks you to do work for free, in my opinion, that's super scummy. I don't recommend that you accept that. But if you want to use free or discounted work as a way as sort of a stepping stone to your own goals, I think that's fine, right? That's different. That's on your terms. You're offering, maybe you go to a friend, they own a business and you want to help them by offering to do some work free or discounted in order to get that hands-on experience. I think that's fine as long as they're not coming to you and expecting you to work for free, in which case I would say don't do that. So free or discounted work, again, is a way to kind of get you in the door, get you some of that hands-on experience if maybe you are trying to make that leap or jump into something that you've never done before. The next thing would be like speculative work for marketing. So it's sort of similar to free or discounted work, but you're not like giving it to anyone, right? So let's say, I'm going to build a content marketing strategy for, HubSpot. And, I'm just doing this to go through the exercise, to learn the process, and then to share that as a piece of marketing for myself so that I can say, hey, check this out, LinkedIn, email list, Twitter, wherever you are trying to share this, look at this work I've done. I built this strategy. Here's the process I went through. Here's all the thinking that went into it, etc. So you have sort of a speculative strategy that you could share to, again, demonstrate that you have the understanding, the skills, the knowledge in order to do that work, which could open up some doors for you to take on some actual paid work, doing something similar for other companies. Number 4 is apprenticeships or internships. Again, depending on kind of where you're at in your career, this may seem like a huge step backwards, et cetera. But I think actually it's sort of an undervalued strategy in my opinion, especially if you're trying to make a big leap from, something that you've never really done into something new. Just sort of getting that like hands-on experience and learning directly from somebody who's done that work before can be super valuable. So I do think, at least entertain the idea of some kind of an apprenticeship or internship if you're trying to learn a new skill or move into a new line of work or industry. Number 5 is going to be courses or training. There are courses or training out there that can help you make those sort of big leaps, right? Now, the big caveat, the big asterisk here is I would only recommend using course or training if it's actionable or hands-on and not just theory, right? Because most courses are sort of built on the idea that I talked about before, which is, the brick by brick method, right? They're going to teach you, here's how this thing works, here's how this thing works, here's how this part works. And then at the end, you're sort of left trying to piece it together, right? Or you just learn sort of the theory, but you don't actually get like the hands-on experience that you need. The key thing with this process is making your own experience means that you have something tangible that you can show a potential future client or employer to say, look, I have done this work before. Here's an example, right? And so unless that course gives you that opportunity, then I would say it's probably not worth it. But if you do have a course or a training that's going to teach you, how to do that thing and also give you the hands-on experience actually doing that work, then it could be a viable path in my experience. So making your own experience, I think, is sort of the key to overcoming that experience paradox. Again, I think right now, especially because writing work and, especially like sort of more general writers, I think are feeling a lot of those pains that we talked about at the top of the presentation. I think there's a lot of pressure for folks to kind of move into new areas and explore new skills, upskill in their career, those types of things. And so, I want to talk about the experience paradox because I feel like a lot of folks feel that pressure, but they think that they're kind of stuck in what they're doing. They don't really know how to take that next step or niche into a specific industry that they've never worked in before, those types of things. So that's make your own experience. I just want to do one quick shout out here. I'm sort of at the end of my deck, so happy to jump into questions. But I did mention top of the funnel Tofu. As I said, it's our free Slack community, so it's 100% free to join. I would love to have you there if you found this valuable. If you are interested in more content, again, about sort of how to level up your career and move into new spaces, that kind of thing. Inside top of the funnel, we've got work opportunities, Q&As, networking, we've got workshops, expert interviews, all kinds of great content in there. So yeah, I would love to have you join us if that sounds like your thing and you found this valuable. You can join for free, join tofu.co. And yeah, that's my presentation for today.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Tyler. And everyone, if you could just drop your questions in the chat. I have some questions that people asked ahead of time, so I'm going to start off with those. Definitely drop your questions in the chat as we're going. This is kind of what we're dealing with in the course right now, Tyler, in terms of the imposter syndrome, which I think is the predominant feeling. And I agree with so much of what you said in terms of kind of throwing yourself into opportunities and learning how to do it as you go. I feel like that's the only way I went from a blog writer to an email writer to a website copywriter. It was literally just saying, yeah, I can do that. And then Googling the heck out of it and trying my best. Would you say that that's accurate of how you took on new projects without experience?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you how many clients, especially early in my career, that, yeah, I would get work doing something that I had totally never done before. And I would, acted like I knew what I was doing and then just kind of figured it out as I went through the process. And yeah, I definitely think that that's also another reason why imposter syndrome feels so real is because there isn't really, there's no way to get experience writing other than writing. It's just the reality.
Exactly. So there was a question or kind of like a comment. If that the question was, I know I'm capable of writing good copy, but I feel like I don't know enough about marketing and content strategy. And I'm afraid that I'll get on a call with a potential client and they'll discover that I don't know what I'm talking about. How would you respond to that?
I mean, that is a tough one. I mean, I think my blanket recommendation there is like, be honest. But I do think it's okay to you don't necessarily have to like say like, oh, I don't know anything about that or whatever, right? Like there are ways that you can kind of deflect it a little bit in my experience. So if it's something that you can learn, or maybe I don't know that off the top of my head, but like if you give me a couple seconds, I can figure it out, that kind of thing. A lot of times what I will tell clients in those situations is, I don't have that right off the top of my head, but let me take that offline and kind of come back to you with some thoughts, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that ultimately comes back. I mean, that is sort of classic imposter syndrome in my mind, in that you have this fear of sort of being discovered, right? Which I think is sort of the most common symptom of imposter syndrome. So I think more than anything, it's important to recognize that like most prospective clients are not out to get you. They're not getting on these calls to like try to trap you into admitting something that you don't know or that you don't have experience with. So I think it's okay to go into those calls and recognize the things that you don't know, and again, being honest about them, but also being willing to just be like, hey, you know what, I don't have that information right in front of me, or I want to check on something before I give you a recommendation or whatever it is. Do that in a way that doesn't feel like you have to sort of admit defeat per se, but it does give you kind of an opportunity to make sure or to kind of double check on something that you don't feel confident about answering on a live call. So I would say, stock up on a couple of those like basic responses. That's one of my favorites. Is just like, hey, let me check on that before I give you a recommendation. I think I have the answer, but I don't want to give it to you just in case. Or, let me look at how other people in your industry have done that, and then I can make a more accurate suggestion. Something like that.
I love that. And something else that I like to do, and I just had to deploy this on with a client. Basically, I wanted to graduate from doing like a lot of long form content to more conversion copy projects with a client. And he asked me point blank, well, what is your ads writing experience? And I did not have any, even though that was the project that I was trying to get. And I told him, while I don't have like exact, precise ads writing experience, I have written a ton of highly converting email subject lines and YouTube video titles. I've increased click through rate. So, what I did was I started referring back to all of the transferable skills that I did have to try to say, listen, these are adaptable to what you are looking for, which is catchy hooks, titles that convert. And I think we all, despite, regardless of our experience level, have a bank of transferable skills that we've gained over time that we can pull to mind and say, even if it's just to relay or to convey enthusiasm and say, I love researching this topic. So I know I'd be able to write an amazing blog post about that or email newsletter about that because I live, eat, and breathe this type of content. I'm the consumer of this content. So I think there's ways that we can overcome the experience paradox, as you say, just by being earnest.
Yeah, 100%. And then also sort of pointing to your experience learning other skills. A common question that we get, because as an agency is, we'll get on a call with somebody and they'll be like, hey, we're a, I don't know, aerospace engineering company or whatever. And it's like, do you have any experience writing about aerospace? And I'm like, no, we don't have any experience writing about aerospace engineering, but we also didn't have any experience writing about, I don't know, HR technology, before we started working with this client. Like, there's a process, there's an art, there's a science to learning new things. And so if you can point to, yeah, I haven't learned this thing yet, but look, I've learned these 20 other things and I have a process for learning and getting up to speed quickly. I think that's also another strategy there. But I love the transferable skills one is clutch for sure.
I have one more question. A lot of writers go into these calls with clients just having maybe like 1 to 2 deliverables in mind to offer the client, whether it be like blogs or email newsletters. And then sometimes, and what I encourage writers to do in this course is to listen to what their content marketing strategy is, see what they could need help with, and propose those services. So I recently had a student ask me, or she was telling me about the call she got on with a client, and he needed help. His main marketing strategy was appearing on podcasts and promoting his products with these interviews that he was doing. So I said, you should propose him an email nurture sequence so that all of the traffic he gains from these interviews, they can come into his world and be nurtured by an email sequence, or create him a lead magnet that he can drop this link in at the end of the episode and said, if you're more interested in learning about these products, you're going to want to download my free guide. And that's how he's going to convert podcast listeners into email subscribers. But the student who I was mentoring on this situation, she was like, well, I only was going to offer him blogs because that's what I was comfortable doing. I don't want to, she termed it, bite off more than I can chew. So if you were mentoring a student who had a concern like that, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think your general advice is right. I mean, I think I guess it kind of depends on the situation there, but like if you're really interested in working with that particular client or you're really looking to take on like a new client in that situation, I think you do have to be flexible. You have to be willing to, kind of meet their needs, because at the end of the day, like if they need an email nurture sequence and you offer them blog posts, then there's a pretty good chance that they'll just be like, that's not going to really help me, or that doesn't really fit into my marketing strategy. So I mean, if I were to really kind of assess that, I would say like, can we rewind that clock and go back to like, where did this lead come from? Did you sort of like qualify them? Because I think that there's a time and a place to sort of learn those new skills and extend into that stuff, and I think that can be valuable. But in some cases, maybe you already have a bunch of leads, and really your challenge is that you need to do a better job of qualifying them up front, that they actually fit into what you're good at and what you want to focus on. Because I do think that's another trap that people fall into, is that I think it's valuable to be flexible, and especially early in your career, I think at some point you want to figure out what you are actually best at and what you enjoy doing, and start to try to focus more on getting those clients rather than just adapting your work constantly to whatever people need. That's my personal opinion. So I guess, like I said, I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think it sort of depends on the context there. If I were to, assuming that they really needed that client, that work, and they were open to sort of learning new skills, then I think, yeah, the only way you're really going to close that client realistically is probably if you offer them something that aligns directly with what they actually need, rather than just sort of pitching them. It's sort of like I don't know, somebody goes to a hamburger stand, you're like, well, I don't really have hamburgers, but do you want a taco instead? Like that's gonna be a hard sell, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's either you adopt the flexibility and say, "Hey, I'm willing to take on whatever it is just to work with you. I'll be flexible." And you have to be open to, like you were saying, doing a bad job potentially just for the sake of the experience and giving it a try. That was the approach that I mostly took throughout freelancing. I've done pretty much every type of deliverable, so I know what I hate from experience doing it. I've written knowledge-based articles, I've written press releases, like things that I would say no to today just because doing it was not fun. And then the other option is just to say, well, if this person only wants a lead magnet or an email nurture sequence, and I know I don't want to do that, then I just have to, like you said, qualify them in the beginning, not be a prisoner of hope, trying to fit every single client into what
Mm,
it is we want them to be, and just accepting, this is not the right fit.
totally, totally. And I know that's easier said than done, depending on where you're at in your career. But that also, comes back to why it's so important to have systems and be marketing yourself and differentiating yourself in that thing, because then it gets easier to have those conversations and to be honest and to be straightforward rather than clinging on to any client lead like it's life or death.
Exactly. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, but I so appreciate you coming, Tyler. This was super informative. I think this is going to make a huge impact. I'm definitely going to be joining Top of Funnel. You said that was a Slack group, correct?
Yep, yep.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I did see that you are always on top of so many writing opportunities on LinkedIn. So if you guys are not following Tyler on LinkedIn, him coming up in my algorithm just, on my feed because you like all of these writing opportunities has given me a
Mm.
lot of great opportunities and helps me discover companies. So everybody follow him for sure.